Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We are recording this on Monday. What is today? April 27th. And I'm joined with my two partners, Kirk Turner and Charlie Plumb. And last Wednesday, Governor Stitt announced his program for reopening the Oklahoma economy. And we took that and sent out a survey the next day. Thank you for those of you that participated. We received somewhere around 400 responses from a wide variety of employers, not just in Oklahoma, but a lot of them outside of Oklahoma too. And thank you guys for responding. And so we're going to take Governor Stitt's program, kind of use that as a framework along with our survey results and kind of walk through the survey results and maybe offer some suggestions about what the survey results show. We're very interested, and I'm sure you are too, in what other employers plan to do and when they plan to do it. At a broad level, and we're not going to get into the specifics of Governor Stitt's program. If you Google, his program is called the OURS, O-U-R-S program, and I think it's Open Up and Recover Safely is what it stands for. People in government love those acronyms. But so if you Google that, you'll find it and you can read it. And so we're not going to go into great detail, but just know it really has three phases. The first phase started April 24th, so last Friday. And then it's the second phase, and kind of obviously things gradually open up. The second phase begins May 15, assuming certain benchmarks are met. And then the third phase, when the economy is open up fairly broadly, is June 1. And what's interesting to me, and I'm sure it's very interesting for my partners and for those of you watching this, is that it had specific recommendations related to what employers should do. And so, like I'm looking here at one section, and this is for phase 1, and it says employers should consider developing policies and procedures related to things like temperature checks and sanitation, break rooms, and bringing, the governor encouraged Oklahoma employers to work on policies and procedures to phase people back into work. And so, again, we're going to go over those. We had, out of the 400 or so that responded, we had about 120 of those from states other than Oklahoma. Wide variety of sizes in terms of employers, somewhere everywhere from 0 to more than 500. The large majority of the employer responses were in that 50 to 250 range. And about 70% said that 70% of you that responded said you had closed your workplace in whole or in part. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Charlie and let Charlie talk about the first part of our survey.
Thanks, Brandon. This reopening and this resumption of operations, for you as employers, it starts with when do I make that decision? When do I start reopening? So one of our questions to our employers was, what is the likelihood that you're going to reopen partially or in full on or before May 30th? And that May 30th date is within kind of the tail end of Governor Stitt's phase 2 of his program. And approximately 3/4 of you told us you're going to be opening in whole or in part on or before May 30th, which I thought was significant. The other thing we were trying to get a flavor from you all as employers is there's a lot of cross currents. There's a lot of issues. What sort of concerns when we've been going through this crisis and we're getting into a reopening or a resumption mode, what sort of concerns do you as employers have? We said, what's your primary concern? Is it legal liability? Is it staffing? Is it health and safety issues? Is it the potential for adverse publicity if your reopening or resumption goes poorly or there are problems with that? And nearly 80% of our employers that participated in the survey responded. Over 80% said their primary concern was safety for both their employees and their customers and third parties, which again, I think is very consistent with Governor Stitt's program, Brandon, and lines up with that. And I think the significance of that response is a couple of things. Number one, I think you as employers are wrestling around if and when I open, is it going to be safe, and can I make it safer for my employees and customers? And there's also the economic issue of if I reopen, am I going to have sufficient demand? Am I going to have people coming into my restaurant? Am I going to have people ordering my product? Am I going to have people requesting my services? There's some open question now on how much demand for these reopening businesses, and we've seen just some anecdotal stories lately. On in the Friday Wall Street Journal, there was an article. Georgia is in this process, or a few days ahead of Oklahoma in this reopening process, and there was a very good article about employers questioning or trying to decide whether I'm going to follow the Georgia plan or not, or whether I'm going to hold back. And yesterday's Tulsa World had a series of interviews that were primarily restaurants, and you could tell that restaurants, but not limited to restaurants, there was going to be some question of when and how to reopen. So all employers, I think, are wrestling around with that. Now, that was the portion of our survey that was really devoted to timing and how that decision is going to be, what sort of timeline you are going to have in terms of reopening. We also, Kirk, talked to people, what was that going to look like? If I made a decision, hey, I'm ready to reopen, or I'm going to be ready to reopen by May 30th, what's my reopening going to look like? And what do our employers tell us?
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating as it relates to, and really consistent with Governor Stitt's plan, that about 3/4 of the respondents said that they were gonna bring people back in a kind of a staggered way, and that may mean both in terms of how many people are actually going to come back to work initially, and then phase people in, and it also, I think, is going to relate to when people are going to start to work on a particular day. Other people are going to start 2 hours later. Other people are going to, so we're going to stagger both the number of people that come in and then how they come into the workplace, again, for this whole purpose of social distancing, to try to keep people from being at the water cooler or at the time clock at the same time. So 73% of our respondents said they were going to return in phases, which again is consistent with Governor Stitt's staged return. And then 23% said they'll be spreading employees out to different shifts. So we're going to see a broadening of our work base as people are returning to work. And then 15% that when they return, they think they're going to have their employees talking about what you're talking about, which is the reduced demand. We're going to reduce hours, at least for a while, until we see whether or not the demand is necessary to bring people back on a full-time basis. I think we're going to see that return to work really for two reasons. One, demand from business standpoint, and then two, I think we're going to return people in phases because we want to make sure people are healthy. And this issue that you said initially about what's the overriding demand, overriding concern here is health and safety of our people. And we got to keep that at the forefront of our mind. We got to be thinking about that all the time. Even if we have demand, we still should be thinking about, is this right for our people in terms of the health and safety? Bringing them all back at the same time potentially creates some risk.
Our survey said May 30 is when we'll, in terms of the time frame, will you open up by May 30? And that's kind of what you talked about, Charlie. What is the, just based on the feel you're getting from employers, my sense is that employers, it's for most of the clients I'm talking to, it's kind of mid-May is what people are going to start bringing people back around the middle of May. At least most of the clients I talk to. Is that consistent with what you guys are seeing? Or
I think that's what I'm hearing, the same thing. Although I do think there are some distinctions depending on what kind of business you're in and what level of interaction you have with third parties. I mean, if you're an industry or business where you have a lot of contact with the public, restaurants, service industries, you may be a little slower. More office environment or manufacturer environment where you have more control, you may be more aggressive. Kirk, your thoughts?
I think that's right. I think we're hearing May 11, May 18. There's kind of two target dates to start kind of reopening. And I think this planning phase is really important. That's why we're here to talk about this. Is we don't want to rush bringing people back to work without having a plan. And this planning piece of it is really important. How are we going to communicate with employees? How are we going to deal with teleworking? How are we going to address health and safety issues? How are we going to communicate these policies that we're going to encourage you to get? And I think it's going to take you a week or two to make sure you've got your ducks in a row.
Not to state the obvious, though, but if we're here on April 27th, and most of our clients, that's kind of May 11, May 18, really they've got 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get ready to go. So we don't have much time, right?
Right. And
Absolutely.
now, Kirk, you just got made mention of something I was going to ask. We've seen a lot of remote working and teleworking as businesses have been closed or partially closed. What did our respondents say about teleworking or remote working? Ongoing, meaning after that May 11th or May 18th that Brandon's talking about.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. I thought it was the most fascinating response that we got. We got almost 3/4, 73% of our respondents have said we are going to continue teleworking at some level. Maybe not at full level, but I think we're going to see much more remote work. We're going to see many more people who are, whether they've got health issues or they fit in one of these additional categories that creates exposure for them. We're going to try to accommodate them by allowing them to telework. And anecdotally, we've heard people feel like they're more productive at home in terms of getting their stuff done and not having distractions from other people kind of intruding into their work and getting their work done. And ultimately, that's what we care about, is getting work done. And again, I understand the collaboration, but the more we can social distance, the more we can work remotely, then I think the safer our workplace is, for sure.
We had this discussion in our last video about return to work, and I think it is an important point. You used the word accommodation for these employees that might have health concerns or in a vulnerable group. I think this survey reminds us that when you have employees that are expressing concern about returning to work, some skepticism, maybe they have some health issues, we've got to deal with those on almost an individual basis. And your use of the term accommodation, which may mean for some employees letting that teleworking or remote continue, that could be important. My danger is if I'm at home working, once Sports Center and sports are up and running, in terms of productivity, I'm out. Okay.
We understand. The other thing that I thought was interesting is we also in the survey asked about whether or not you were going to continue to limit access to the public or customers and clients and people, third parties, vendors and suppliers. They're going to come into your workplace, and definitely there is going to continue to be a restriction. 80% of you said that you're going to continue to restrict access to your workplace for the purpose of social distancing. We think that's a really smart idea. We think that's a communication tool as well that we need to make sure that people understand that we prefer to them communicate through technology than to communicate in person. And we know your salespeople and vendors, they want to have a touch, but we're going to, at least for the immediate future, we're going to sort of slow that down and make sure that we've addressed preventing people from coming into our workplace that are not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, the kind of open work environment we've had in the past, family and friends, there have been security issues, and that's been ratcheted down. But I think you're telling us that's going to be ratcheted down further in the wake of COVID.
Yeah, I think it's going to continue. The other thing I wanted to make sure, Charlie, and I think you're going to talk about this, is that the testing protocols are going to continue. And why don't you hit on that a little bit as it relates to testing protocols?
Well, and this is going to be one of the big challenges. Brandon, the hours program you talked about, Governor Stitt's guidelines and his recommendations are tied into the ability to test our employees, and when we do have positive tests, for our community to do some contact tracing. So, and the ability to move to later stages in his program is premised upon that. That's going to be maybe a practical and logistic problem that we're going to have to keep our eyes on. So he's encouraged, and the program encourages, consistent with what the CDC has been telling us, encourages employers to be involved in that testing process. So some of our questions were aimed at what sort of testing or monitoring of employees do you intend? And 62% of our employers responding said they intend to test employees as a condition of returning to work. So about 2/3 of our respondents say before we bring somebody back to work, we're going to have them be tested. That's a great idea. Again, it's consistent with Governor Stitt's directives and consistent with what the CDC is saying. One of the questions is, how do we get access to that? How do we pull that off? We do have 2 or 3 weeks, and supposedly we have a good supply, but there are going to be logistic problems, and it's going to be harder for some, smaller employers than larger employers to get their arms around that. We also asked you all as respondents, what were you going to do in the way of testing or monitoring employees going forward after they return to work. And 65% of you said that you are going to be doing some testing or monitoring of employees after they return to work. And they could be formal COVID tests. They could be taking temperatures. Kirk, you're going to talk to us about some of those specific policies. It may be questionnaires, asking employees on a daily basis or periodically, have you experienced these symptoms, affirming they have or have not. And Kirk, we're going to get into a little bit deeper. That's important. And I think, we've also saw in your responses that nearly half, about 43% of you said this testing and these questionnaires that we're going to get into and deeper with Kirk's policies and procedures, we're going to apply those to people that are entering our workplace. They might be vendors, they might be suppliers, they could be third-party contractors. We're going to apply that same. And we just had Brandon, I guess it was Friday, Paige Good, one of our lawyers in our employment department, has done a great article laying out the legal issues of how employers can effectively really conduct testing and these kind of questionnaires about health issues. Historically, that's been somewhat off limits. Now we're going to be more aggressive in that regard. So I really encourage you to go to our McAfee Taft COVID-19 response page and look at Paige's article. It's A1. It's very, very helpful.
And it's really consistent with what we've been talking about, Charlie, Absolutely. Since this started, right? I mean, we've been talking about being on the aggressive side because of the public health issue. And I think, what the EEOC is doing, allowing temperatures to be taken, now allowing testing to be done, is consistent with what we've been talking about since the beginning.
So I promised that Kirk was going to go deeper on the questionnaires and the policies. Tell us first what our respondents said about those policies and procedures, and then give us some direction, not only what other employers are planning, but how your recommendations dovetail with those.
Yeah. So we need policies and we need procedures because A, this is a new world, and B, we need to have real clarity as it relates to these things that we're going to expect of employees. And C, and really importantly, as a lawyer, we want to make sure our clients are protected, that there are risks out there, legal liability risk that we don't cover, that we could cover through policies and distribution of those policies to our employees, just like we do in the equal employment opportunity world and harassment-free workplace world. We want to be clear with our employees about what expectations are, and we want them to also understand potential disciplinary issues if they fail to do what we've asked them to do. As Brandon said, I think it's really important as you look at Governor Stitt's process. One of the things he's really recommending is to have policies and procedures set out so we have clarity with our employees. 70% of you, as you respond, which is a big number, intend to add or include policies and procedures related to testing and related to other return to work type issues. So that's a big number. 87% of you said you will issue a policy explaining how employees can report their own or other employees with COVID. And so this is a really important process where an employee self-discloses, they have a temperature, they have symptoms, they have exposure to somebody who has COVID-19. That as we've continued to have these conversations, we need disclosure forms that people can fill out and complete. And we also need to give people the freedom to go say, hey, I heard my neighbor next door is he's coughing and he told us that he might be exposed to somebody. We need to deal with that. And so again, I know we're all reluctant to go tattle, but we need to communicate. This is a bigger issue than just the tattle. So we got to be able to communicate about those issues.
What's your experience, Ben? I know people sometimes are a little careful, a little reticent about coming forward with their own medical condition or perhaps a family member. In the trenches, what are you seeing? Are people more willing to talk about this in light of the pandemic or our crisis?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, we're all sort of tough and we all sort of just come to work sick but I think given the nature and what the physician last week talked about with regard to the contagion here and the aggressive nature of it, I think we've just got to communicate, hey, listen, this is not only in your best interest, but it's in the interest of everybody else that works here.
And your family.
And your family. That's right. So we need to communicate we need to and be willing to disclose and to go talk with someone, go tell somebody in HR in health and safety to make sure that they understand that, we have information. We don't know if it's accurate or not, but we want to make sure that people are free to communicate.
So what sort of, based on our survey and what you're dealing with the employers, what sort of policies are respondents putting in place, and what sort of policies are you and McAfee Taft working on?
Yeah, so we're definitely working on social distancing policies because it's, again, we can talk in general, but we need to talk in specifics about what the expectations are as it relates to designated entrances and exits, as it relates to staggering work times and breaks, as it relates to limiting meeting sizes. We're going to have to communicate what those things are, modifying work or common areas. And again, 93% of our respondents said that they were going to implement social distancing practices and policies. As it relates to protective equipment, personal protective equipment, about half of our respondents said that they're going to either allow or require employees to wear masks. And we've looked at that issue. We don't see any prohibition on requiring people to wear a mask. Again, we may have to accommodate if somebody has an allergy to a particular type of latex or something type of mask that you might provide. But beyond that, we don't see any real downside to that. Again, about 50% and about 20% of you said we're going to require employees or at least allow employees to wear gloves, protective gloves. So those are really important policies as you relate to what are we going to expect? What's our expectation? Are we going to provide those? Is the employee going to provide them? We need to be clear about those policies.
That's the question I was going to ask is, who do you guys hear? Will the employers ordering masks to have them? And are they, I've been getting questions about where do we find them? Can we get them? And I don't know if we can help with that, but are you guys hearing that employers are gathering their masks for their employees?
Where they can. I mean, I think, again, it's a situation where you as an employer have to be taking the initiative on that. And sometimes it's hard to find masks. And larger employers are having better luck. I think we're fortunate in Oklahoma. We seem to have a better supply. So they're having better luck. The employers I'm working with preparing these policies, but also trying to help them, guide them in finding PPE. I think they're having better success. What do you say?
I mean, I think most of our clients are in this process, and it's good that they're going to open May 11 or May 18, that they're in the process of looking at their supply chain to make sure. And I do think there are masks out there. We just got to be diligent in our purchasing department or HR department or HSC department to make sure that we're trying to provide all that we can. I think it's important that we are at best we can providing them. And again, if we can't provide them, don't have them, then we need to ask people to bring them. It's okay, I think, to ask them to bring them from home to work.
One thing that's interesting to me is that I've heard employers, and it varies by who you are and what you do, but I've heard some employers say, yeah, we're going to require people to wear them when they're entering and leaving the building or when they're getting up from their desk. But to the extent they're in their office, maybe we let them take, I don't know that the people I'm talking to are employers don't seem that they're not going to mandate that people wear them 100% of the time. Is that consistent with what you guys hear too?
Yeah, I think depending on where they're at, where they're located, if they're working on a line right next to somebody, they're going to require them to wear them. If they're working in an office, they can close their door and they can social distance on their own. I don't think they're going to compel them to wear a mask.
One thing I've really realized working on these policies you're talking about with employers, there was and I sound like I'm trying to sell the Wall Street Journal, but Friday's Wall Street Journal again had an article, and it was a HR professional, and she worked in a mac and cheese factory for Kraft Foods, I believe. And one of the things that comes across, we're talking about these policies and working with you all to tailor them to your needs, but day to day, in training employees, communicating with employees about these policies and enforcing these policies. This is going to be on the HR professional. This is going to be on the supervisor. So not only do employers need to get these policies up and running, we got to train our supervisors and HR professionals on how to communicate those policies. And if they see a breach, react to it, because they're going to be responsible for seeing that people are wearing their masks, that people are, and we're all going to slip a little bit. I mean, I find myself, absent-mindedly, we're very faithful when I do come in the office to maintain social distancing and stay away from folks and stay out of other folks' offices. But you do catch yourself, at the copier or at the printer or in the elevator. So we're going to have to educate people about these policies, train our supervisors to be vigilant, and our HR professionals are going to be referees in that regard.
Is it true? It occurs to me that with these policies and procedures, that what you start out with in terms of your policy and procedure, it may need to be adjusted here and there. There may be situations you haven't really thought about as you get rocking along. So it's like, it's not a one and done, it doesn't seem to me, kind of thing where you put it in place and then you never see it again. It may be for some, but for others, it may require some ongoing review. What do you guys think?
Well, Kirk makes, I think you're spot on when you talk about how important communication is. So I think, a weekly, town hall with your employees, I think that's, a reminder. Here's what's happening. Here's what we got to be careful about. I think it's important. One thing we haven't talked about, and it's an unfortunate possibility, as we reopen, we may see spikes, we may see surges, we may see little hot spots. So the other importance of, I think, this communication, Kirk, that you're advising is important, because we're going to have to be, again, flexible. To your point, that may mean tightening up or loosening policies, adjusting them to address, some unfortunate possibilities. An employee test positive.
Yeah, I like travel, for example. We're recommending that we have a travel policy, that we have clear restrictions on people's ability to travel, a disclosure of where you're going to travel, why you're traveling, whether, so the employer can have some control over that. Now, again, that may get loosened up, but you need to have some clear communication with people who are going to be traveling. The same thing as it relates to teleworking. We need to have clear rules about, especially with hourly people, we need to have clear rules about when do you clock in, when do you clock out, how does your work day work, what are the expectations that we have for you as an employee, and those are going to change over time. We may limit your teleworking to 20 hours a week to begin with, and then we may change that. So we just need to be nimble, but we need to have clear communication on the front end, because that's what employees need. They need clarity as it relates to what are the expectations that my employer has for me. And so one of the things we're doing, Charlie, as you know, is we've been working really hard the last week on putting together really a package of materials, policies, procedures, questionnaires for our clients. And we're just putting them, and again, it's not one size fits all. You're going to need to customize these to your particular organization. But we believe that you need to have a social distancing policy. We need to have a travel policy. We need to have a health and safety policy as it relates to testing and requirements. We need to have clear teleworking policies. We need to have questionnaires as it relates to people returning to work. Are we gonna take temperatures? Are we gonna have them disclose where they've been the last 2 weeks? Have they been in any area? Have they traveled in any location? And those seem sort of rote at this point, but every question is important. Every question lines up with the CDC guidelines, and every question is important to relating to the spread of this disease. And it is a big liability preventer if we're asking those questions on a regular basis, so that we don't have someone that said, nobody asked me, I came back to work. So we just need to be thinking about that on a preventative basis, to having at least regular communication with our employees, certainly returning to work. But I think a regular or periodic, whether it's daily or weekly, having an update all the time until we feel like we're out of this pandemic, so that we are clearly keeping records of what our interest is in the health and safety of our employees, and providing a workplace free from known hazards, as we have an obligation to do under OSHA.
Well, and when working with employers on these policies you've described, one of the things is, if we have good policies, if we have good communication with our workforce, it's going to increase the chances we're going to be successful in reopening and resuming, not just in our own workplace, but the community as a whole.
And to your point, just to remind everyone, the phases, Governor Stitt's phases, are kind of conditioned on having favorable, so these policies and procedures kind of help as a society, if you're being a little altruistic, move us from phase 1 to phase 2, and phase 2 to phase 3.
Well, the one thing we've learned from this experience is we're not on an island. A better job we do at our workplace means we're also protecting people's families and people throughout the community.
One thing, I just want to make sure that you guys know, we are here to help. So we want you to to access us, call the lawyers with whom you work. If we can help you and serve you in helping provide these policies, what we're trying to do is provide a template of these really important policies for you to use, just like we did with the FFCRA. We're going to do that on a really easy basis for you. That way, it takes one less thing off your plate. You don't have to worry about it. At least you'll have sort of a 90% document. Then you can customize it to fit you specifically. If we can help you with that, we definitely want to do that.
We've been talking about employment issues, and Brandon, in your neck of the woods, your area, employee benefits has been rather tumultuous. We asked some of our employer respondents what's happening for them. What did you learn from that?
Well, what's interesting to me is that most of you have not been tinkering around with and are unlikely to tinker around with your 401k plan. So about 80% of our folks said they have not suspended employer contributions. They've not really made adjustments to their retirement plan because of this crisis. But on the other hand, people are making fairly radical changes, I think, to their medical plan. So 83% of our respondents said that they would be offering telehealth on a go-forward basis. And so that is that has not been the case in the past, but it makes sense given where we are. So again, we said this last time, to the extent you don't offer telehealth in your health plan now, that's something you should consider. The other thing that was interesting to me is you might recall that the CARES Act, signed on March 27th, and the Families First Act, they require coverage of COVID-19 testing with no cost sharing. They do not require coverage of treatment with no cost sharing, but about 50% of our respondents said they intend to cover treatment of COVID-19 with no cost sharing. That means no out-of-pocket costs, no copay, no deductible, no co-insurance. So while our survey shows that people are not really messing with their 401k plans by and large, their medical plans, they're making some adjustments to them.
I was fascinated by this survey. In our last, and I'd like to do another survey as we get further down the line. In our last video, I pointed out that I had a do-it-yourself haircut that my wife and I had performed on me, and Brandon now has his own do-it-yourself haircut. Looks great. So one of the things
Doesn't take long. Yeah.
Doesn't take long. That's okay. But I think in our next survey, I think I'd like to get a vote on whose haircut is better. I'd be very fascinated by those results.
Well, good. Thank you, Charlie. And with that, I think we're done with our substantive content, but we appreciate you guys joining us. Be sure to check out the McAfee Taft COVID-19 resource page. You can go to our McAfeeandTaft.com website, and there's a kind of a prominent link there. If you've not registered to get our updates, make sure you do. Thank you for joining us.